Well, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone feeling? I hope that you've had much of a wonderful time as I had so far, and it is only about to get better. So just sit back and enjoy. This afternoon, we have the honors of speaking with Minda Harts, and she is the CEO of the Memo LLC. That is also the title of one of her books, The Memo, and also Right Within. And CEO, professor, innovator, podcast host, author, all of these describe her. Those are titles that she holds. And the best part about all of it is that all of the work, no matter which title we are speaking of, all falls under and lends itself to the advancement of people, and more specifically, uh, women of color. So just not people of color, but women of color. So we truly appreciate that. And it's this work that has led to nominations by First Lady Michelle Obama as a change maker. And it's what makes Minda such a desired speaker on topics like diversity and leadership. So thank you so much for being here with us, Minda.
Awesome. I'm excited to be here. So thank you all for sticking around.
Thank you. And so we're going to actually just jump right in. And so, of course, I cannot wait to talk about her book, Right Within. But considering the fact that this is Juneteenth conference and we are honoring Juneteenth, I think we'd miss a huge opportunity if we did not ask you what your thoughts on Juneteenth were and what it means to you.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me here and be in conversation with you, Brandi. For all of you, you could be anywhere in Chicago right now or online, and you're here with me, so that means a lot. Want to say thank you to Mr. Brown because he's like a big brother on Twitter. So when he asked me to come, there was no other answer than yes. So honored to be in the space. Happy Juneteenth. If the banks honor it, then I honor it too. Okay. But Juneteenth is important because it signifies freedom. And one definition of freedom is no longer feeling confined. And as Black people, as brown people, when you feel a sense of freedom, there's nothing better. And it's a lot of why I wrote the books that I did is because we feel so confined in our spaces. Sometimes just walking out of the house in the morning, you're feeling confined. Showing up in the workplace, you're feeling confined. And so Juneteenth is for us. And so I just want us to bask in the freedom, even if we only get it for an hour a day, 30 minutes a day. Find your freedom because that's part of our healing.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And so next, I would love to talk about the inspiration for the book title, because of course, the first time I saw it, and I thought, right within, I'm not sure if we have any hip hop fans out here, but the first thing that I thought about was Miss Lauryn Hill. How you gonna win? How you gonna win if you're not right within? And so it warmed my heart when I opened up the book, and that's what first thing it mentioned. So what inspired that title?
Yeah. So you were right on. Lauryn Hill, if anybody's read any of my books, I'm a very much a pop culture fan. And so I incorporate rap lyrics and pop culture in all my work. And so Lauryn Hill said, how you going to win if you ain't right within? And one of the things that I realized was our colleagues can have all the unconscious bias trainings. They can have all the this, that, and the other. They can read the books and the podcasts, but whether they do their work or not, we still have a choice to be right within or not. And so that's, again, tied to freedom. Back in 1970s, there was an author, her name is Audre Lorde, and she said, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. And each of us deserves humanity, dignity, equity, and respect in every space that we enter. And so part of Right Within is just reminding us that we do deserve the best, right? And that we get to create that each and every day by the choices that we make.
Definitely. And now with this book, I know the memo, it was talking about a seat at the table. Now this one is speaking on basically the realization that you need, some healing and you need to allow yourself that. So what caused you to realize that there was a need for healing? Because, so many people walk around and they think I am A-OK, I am fine. There is nothing wrong with me. You can do whatever you want to, and I'm good. I can keep going. But in real life, each time something happens, that's a scar that's being added. And if you don't let that scar heal, it's just going to be an open wound, just going to keep opening. So what was it that made you realize that there was some healing that needed to be done after being traumatized by like the corporate world and things of that nature?
Yeah, if you don't mind, do you mind if I take us back in the DeLorean, back to the future, to how we how we get to this point in time? But prior, just 5 years ago, I sat in corporate America. So my life has changed a lot in 5 years. So the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves is just as important as any other story that anyone will tell you. And so I told myself when I entered into corporate America, I was a first generation college student, first and foremost, and first person in my family to work in a corporate role. And so I didn't know what I didn't know when I entered the workplace, like many of us. I was just happy that I was making a certain amount of salary. I grew up very poor. And so for me, it was taking my family from low, working poor to middle class, upper middle class. And so I felt this sense of honor doing that. And so I entered into the workplace thinking that we work in a meritocracy, right? If you work hard, you get the things, right? No matter what you look like. And what I realized was, like many of us, once you get in there, and if you are the only or one of few of anything, whatever intersection you sit at, it becomes isolating. And you start to assimilate in ways that you maybe never intended to, right? And I remember my first manager, we'll call him Chad for today. Chad, he he saw that I had on burnt orange fingernail polish, and he said to me, "You people love your bright colors." And yes.
Hey, Chad.
You people. And he went on to joke for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. This is my manager, right? He would go on to say those things several times a day. So I didn't feel like I had the agency to say anything, right? If everybody else in the office is telling you that Chad doesn't mean any harm, just have thick skin, you hear these narratives, so you start to believe them. I guess Chad didn't mean any harm, right? And we make excuses for people at the expense of our own well-being. And I didn't realize that entering into corporate America in 2003, now you kind of know how old I am, shh, it's a secret. I didn't realize how those cuts, Brandi, started to impact me, because I was saying, oh, well, I'm able to take the trips. I'm able to help my family. I'm able to do these things. So I was telling myself this story and not paying attention to any of the pain that I was experiencing. And so it started to distort kind of who I entered corporate America as, right? And so I started to push those things under the rug, like many of us do. But back then, we didn't have fancy names to call them, like microaggressions and macroaggressions. You just knew that you felt like crap, right? But you didn't, or that you didn't belong. You didn't know, you couldn't articulate it. And so it wasn't, I worked in that environment for almost 10 years. And it wasn't until around the time period of Black Lives Matter, I was sitting in my office and there was a demonstration taking place, and I saw Black Lives Matter, and it made me think about what could Black Lives Matter mean in the workplace? What could it mean on the About Us pages? What could it mean in pay equity, right? What could it mean just in our day-to-day lives to work really hard and be seen? Would my career matter inside the workplace with someone else that looks similarly? And so I started to marinate on that, but Brandi, I didn't think I was the person to talk about that, right? I was waiting on somebody else to say the thing, somebody else to write the book, somebody else to save me, quite frankly. And I was always telling myself that I didn't have a voice, like, because you feel so sometimes oppressed, like you don't have a voice inside the workplace, especially sometimes if you're Black or brown or trans or over 50, wherever you might sit. And I came to this conclusion that I always had my voice. I just had to decide how I wanted to use it. But in that environment, I realized that I could not change it by myself. There were too many Chads, and my sanity was like, okay, we're gonna have to move out of this situation, right? And so this will be the longest story that I tell, because we have to get to how Right Within was birthed. But I decided, okay, I need to center myself, but I need to get out of this situation. So left that job, and I took a new role. More pay, all the things I probably should have had 5 years prior, but I finally get it at this new place, right? Sometimes you have to leave to get what you want. And so I take this new role at this new place. They're saying diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're saying all the letters, all the things that I had not heard before. So I'm like, okay, well, they're saying the things that I need to hear right now, that my soul needs to hear. So this must be a good place to work. And I enter into the situation as the only again, right? So I already knew that feeling. So I'm like, okay, we can get through that. But at least my pay and all the other things are here. They're saying these things. And it actually ended up being worse than what I had left. So I would say that the Chad situation was more subtle acts of racism at that time, right? Because I didn't know anything different. So I didn't even want to call it racism at that time. And that's sometimes when we're in these situations, we don't even want to call a thing. And you can't conquer what you're not willing to confront. So at that point in time in my life, I wasn't even able to spit the words out to say that this was oppression. I just knew it felt bad, right? So I take that baggage with me to the next job, but I didn't realize how oppressed I had been. And in this new situation, it got really, really toxic. I had one particular coworker, we'll call her Carrie. And Carrie, she was maybe 30 years older than me and causing a lot of drama. And she was a colleague on the team that I was on. And one meeting I was in, she said, "What does the Black girl think?" as a joke. And I didn't realize how those things had started to impact my mental health. And so over the next year, I started to have anxiety, panic attacks, depression, hair loss, weight was up and down like a yo-yo, but I thought I was the problem. Because if everybody else is telling you, oh no, it's fine, just to have thick skin, and I didn't realize how it was impacting my mental health. And if anybody remembers the song by Erykah Badu, Bag Lady, anybody remember that classic song? She said, "One day all those bags gonna get in your way, so pack light." And I had taken all these bags, but I didn't realize they are starting to weigh me down. And at this point, I need a therapist and a chiropractor, right? Because it's heavy. But again, I thought I was the issue because I didn't know what else to do. And I was in a situation where I'm making even more money, even more responsibilities with family and those sorts of things. And I was not in a position to quit. So as Black women in particular, we get advanced degrees in trying to make everything work. So I'm trying to make everything work, right? I'm coming in early, I'm staying late. Bob likes red velvet cupcakes. I got the red velvet cupcakes. Like, I'm trying to do all these things, right? And I'm still having the best career year that I could possibly have, but yet my mental health is deteriorating in front of my face. The person I entered into corporate America as in 2003, I didn't even recognize myself by the time 2015. So longer story short, a year had passed in this environment. Things had gotten kind of bad, and I finally decided, Minda, you have your voice, you have to use it. And I was waiting again for all the allies to show up. I'm waiting on these other things to happen. And I realized that I had the power in my own tongue. And so I advocated for myself at the most senior levels, saying, hey, you see what's going on here? Can somebody please remove this barrier for me? I can't do this by myself. They said, well, you're having a great year. We're happy that you're here, but that person, the clients love her. So you need to figure out if this is the place for you. We hope you can figure it out. And I just remember that day. I'll never forget, 2014. I was sitting in the senior leader's office, and I was playing the song on a loop like it was a Beyonce song, Minda, don't cry, Minda, don't cry, because it wasn't what they didn't say in that meeting. It was what no one ever said all these years. And it was 13 years at that point. And so I didn't cry there, but it was a Friday. I pick up my stuff and at my desk and go to my car. And when I get to my car, I cry, right? I cry this like really heavy, probably like Negro spiritual cry, it's like real heavy. I'm like, oh Lord, a cleanser cry. I cried partially because I felt stuck, no options. I'd moved my life from one coast to another to take this role. And I get emotional about it now because so many people are crying on their couch now, their favorite chair in their office, feeling like they have nowhere to go. And I sat in the car that day and I just thought, dang, what am I going to do? And I can't leave, I can't quit, all these things. And so I thought about the word courage, the ability to do something that frightens one. And I thought about all the people who had come before me. We're in Juneteenth, Black women, brown women, Black men, brown men, everyone who's come before me. And I thought, Minda, even in this moment, you are a beneficiary of somebody else's courage. who's going to benefit from your courage? Or are you just going to keep perpetuating these same cycles that are hurting Black and brown people inside the workplace? Are you going to be part of the solution? Because even though it's not the best for you right now, think about the people who fought for you, that were fighting for things that you get to experience right now, that they didn't even get to do the work that you get to do today. And I sat in that moment, lashes on the ground, thinking about courage, makeup dripping down my face. I turn on the radio and Whitney Houston's "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" comes on the radio. And at this point, I'm laughing and crying because I'm like, God, you have such a funny sense of humor. Where do the broken hearts go? Of Black women and brown women who are just feeling this pain. Where do our broken hearts go when we can't take the workplace anymore? And it was in that moment in 2014 in my car where I didn't have the answers, Brandi, but I committed in that moment. I wasn't able to quit yet, but I committed in that moment that someone would benefit from my voice. Because what I realized was that my voice was tied to somebody else's freedom. Your voice is tied to somebody else's freedom when we're talking about this freedom thing. And I then started to think about work a little bit differently, no longer making it work for everybody else, but how do I make it work for me? And it was through starting my company and then having my first book, The Memo. It was the first book by a major publisher about the experiences of women of color in the workplace in 2019, became a bestseller. And then I thought I didn't have anything else to write, because what you don't know is that I'm an extreme introvert. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to do this public speaking thing. But again, our voices are tied to somebody else's freedom. And so I realized that it wasn't just for me, it's for the ecosystem, right? And I said, that was the book I wrote. It did well. It's changing lives. We're making impact. And then the pandemic hit, and I thought about all the experiences that I'd had over 15 years and the therapy that I needed to continue my healing journey and all those sorts of things. And I thought, you know what? Now that we have certain seats at the table, we need freedom at these tables. We need to heal, right? And that's what led me to write Right Within, because healing isn't a one-time event, it's a lifestyle.
And that is an amazing story. And you touched on so many things that I was going to talk about. I'm trying not to get emotional. But different things, like I know you talk about therapy and things like that. And I know that in our culture, in our community, that is something that you done, and you're good, you're strong, you're good. I think that was absolutely speak on that in the book. And my next question was talking about your journey, and I think that was it hurts me that that's something that you had to endure. How many of you have someone's test, their testimony that can be after you? So, since writing the book, what has your journey been like? How did you know Minda is, and they were not okay? That was not okay. The microaggressions were there, and those are. How has your journey been since?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The thing is, part of the equation that we can solve is what we do for us. And I think we've been conditioned to be strong Black people, but what would it look like to be strong for ourselves instead of everybody else, And so Right Within is that soft place to land, to say, you weren't making these things up. You're not going crazy, because we're having mental gymnastics in the workplace. Wait, did they mean that? Did they not mean that? I don't know. And then we go home, or you're working from home and you're ruminating on what was said all day long, right? And that's toxic to your health. And so part of, the writing Right Within was just, healing isn't just like a cute, fun thing to say. It takes work to heal, right? I'm still healing. I was in a 15-year toxic workplace relationship, I'm still healing every day. But I take my healing so seriously, right? Malcolm X said, by any means necessary, like any means necessary, I'm not going to allow anybody or anything to compromise my healing, right? And part of that is understanding your worth, right? My worth is not tied to somebody else. If they see me, if they promote me, I'm going to do the best work I can do. But it's not so much, Brandi, people say, bring your authentic self to work. Anybody, we hear that talk at work all the time, bring your authentic self to work. And for me, it's two-pronged. They really don't want us to bring our authentic self to work. They want us to bring the version that they are comfortable with to work. So I don't subscribe to bringing my authentic self. I subscribe to bringing my healthiest self, because if I'm healthy, then you're going to get those authentic pieces of me. You're going to get the best work that I can do, right? When I use my voice and say what I mean and create boundaries, then I'm creating a safe space for myself to be able to do my best work. And so I think that right within was that permission slip for many of us to say, you know what, that did happen to me. And I have a lot of people who will read right within initially and say, oh no, none of these things happened to me, but we've suppressed so many things because we've normalized the behavior. That's all most of us know is these kind of environments. So we may say that they're not oppressive because we don't know anything different, but toxicity is not normal. And as Black and brown people, our life expectancy is cut short due to chronic stress. What do you think contributes to some of the things that we're dealing with in the workplace? So I came to a point and said, I'll be damned if I let this workplace kill me. You're just not going to do it. I'm not going to let you do it, So, but part of that was taking my agency back. And I'm not saying everybody leave your jobs. We need us in the inside too. But what does good, healthy boundaries look like, right? And people will adapt to that when we brand ourselves in a way that, no, you can't call me Brandi and my name is Minda and we've been working together for 10 years. I'm not going to just allow you to diminish me in that way. Rather, intended, good intentions or not, right? And I think our next generation deserves that. Again, when we think about who's going to be a beneficiary of it, it's important that we use our voices because then they benefit from that coming along. So when we're scared to say the thing, think about that young person that's coming behind us, right? That they don't have to fight. They don't have to have those same tears cried in the workplace, that they can come to work and do their best work without all of the other issues that arise, right? Because the other part is, because of the oppression, we think grateful to be here, right? We don't want to say anything because we're grateful to be here, but newsflash, grateful to be here is not on the job description.
I took away from that perhaps that moment that you feel, you shouldn't let it slide, and maybe we'll talk about it later. That moment is when you perhaps should get up and see how you're.
Yeah, I mean, even if you never speak on it to that person, we can't lie to ourselves. And I think that's part of it, right? We'll even tell ourselves a story that, oh, that wasn't what it was, but we can't lie to ourselves, right? I mean, we know what respect looks like and we know what it doesn't, right? So even if we never tell our manager, even if we never have a conversation, but be honest with yourself about what it is. And I'm not saying like somebody who made a mistake or it was a one-time thing, but I also talk about patterns of behavior, right? Is this person always saying these sorts of things every time I see them, or are these just, that happened one time? And so also flexing our emotional intelligence, because listen, it's like a part-time job if we address every single thing that's happening in the daytime. But think about what are those things that you're going to sleep with and you wake up still thinking about. Give yourself permission to have those conversations, because my grandmother used to say, closed mouths don't get fed. And I use that in the sense of, how can people know to do right by you if they don't know that they've harmed you?
One of the things that I did want to touch on with the imposter syndrome, but unfortunately it is real, and although that outside are distracting us, not supporting us. We have microaggressions. Sometimes they talking our way. And of course, I would love to get rid of it as well, but it is. What are your thoughts on imposter syndrome? How we can possibly tackle it?
I agree with Mr. Brown. we have to get rid of it because here's the thing: if we want to thrive and not just survive, imposter syndrome cannot occupy the same space with it. You're just not going to get ahead constantly questioning yourself. You're participating in your own oppression by constantly saying, did I deserve this? Should I be here? And so for me, I have battled with that for a very long time because growing up from very humble beginnings, when I was thrusted into these white tablecloth rooms and 10 forks and 5 glasses, I'm like, I don't know which one to choose, so you think, should I be here? Or you get to this new position and you're like, well, I'm the only one, or do I have enough credentials? And so we question ourselves. But let's be honest, if you're in the room or you got the promotion, you probably should have had it like 5 years ago, and you're finally getting your opportunity to do it. And it's what you do with that seat while you're there. And so let's not participate in negative self-talk to ourselves. I write about having an enemy state of mind where we're constantly questioning ourselves, or having an empire state of mind. You can make it anywhere. And I think it's very important, again, the tools that we pass on, if we're passing on this questioning, then those are the tools we pass on to the next generation. And our self-worth, again, rather our colleagues or managers see it, it can't be tied to their yes or no, right? And once I realized that I'm worthy of all the good things, that I belong in every room I enter, but not every room deserves to have me, I am the asset, right? It's a mindset shift. And once you understand that, you realize I can no longer date imposter syndrome. I can't be in a long-term relationship with it because it's only weighing me down and it's not going to get me to that place. And so imposter syndrome is a social construct, right? And we participate in it or not. So I would encourage every time it tries to leap up, remind yourself, I belong, I am good enough, I'm worthy of these things, because that's the thing that's trying to hold you down. I used to have this manager, Chad, same Chad. He used to, I used to be his go-to person, like his wingman. Whenever something was going on, I'd fix it. He knew I'd get it done. And then one day he knew that I was like kind of rising up, and he told me, and I was young, like 25 when he said this, you're incompetent. And you always tell me that. And for a little while, I started to believe it. So I didn't shine as bright. And then I had to have a moment with myself and say, wait a second, Minda, why would he say that to you? And why are you believing it? Look at the receipts, right? So look at your receipts. When you start to question yourself, if you were incompetent, why would your manager keep asking you to get projects done? You've never been told that in your one-on-one evaluations, your annual review. You keep getting promoted in these different ways. So what is that about? That's his own baggage, right? And so again, realizing what we do bring to the table, and we have to remind each other of those things as well. And just again, we can't date it anymore because it's not helping us. And again, going back to being right within, constantly oppressing yourself and questioning yourself is only causing that chronic stress to your body.
I know some people I was supposed to be hadn't heard of. For any allies, let's allies, because we have a lot of people that say that they are our allies, but like I love that this is coming circle because something that we're touching on now, but to say it totally different than be it. And so allies.
Yeah, I mean, our success is not a solo sport. If we could get everywhere we needed to by ourselves, then we would have done it already on our own. But we need the help of other people. We need people speaking our names in the rooms that we're not in, right? And so I had a gentleman in my life named Chuck, and he opened up doors that I wouldn't have been able to open up fast enough for myself. But he was able to diffuse and take away some of those barriers. So we do need allies. I have the pleasure of speaking at a lot of companies, and the one thing when I'm talking about allyship is I say, allyship is a spectrum, right? Sometimes we think as allies, and let's be clear, we all can be allies. It's not reserved for one particular person or identity or group, but who's benefiting from you being an ally, right? It's not enough to just say you're an ally if nobody's ever, it's not feeling demonstrated, right? And so, for example, I was a couple years ago, right before the pandemic, I was at this really fancy like thing that it was like invite only, and I was new kind of in my, I guess, influencer author life, and so imposter syndrome was trying to show up in that way, but I had to kick him or her to the curb. They all had to leave, and there I was having kind of that mingling where you're doing a lot of small talk, right? And I considered myself an ally in different ways, but when you're tested to really show up for somebody, you're thinking about who can benefit from it. So I'm having this conversation with two other people that I didn't know. I just met them. I had seen them, on social media, but we had never connected. And one of the people that were there, they identified as a Black male, the other person as a trans woman. And then, I'm there, I identify as a Black woman. And we're having this conversation, and I'm kind of thinking about some other things, but trying to be dialed into the conversation as well. But the two of them were having this like back and forth, and the Black gentleman was saying to the trans woman, she, or he, but they go by she. And so I'm standing there, and it dawned on me, like, Minda, are you just going to let this person, keep misgendering? Are you going to be part of the solution here, right? And there's a lot of different ways you can show up, right? Now my personality was not, to call him out and holler and get on the table and be like, but I realized that subtle acts of courage also go a long way too. And so in that moment, a few seconds later, I looked at him and I said, she said X, Y, and Z. And that small little bit changed the way that he was now, we created a new norm. Like, I'm affirming her, we're having this conversation. And then he started referring to her as she after that, right? And so again, showing up for people in certain ways, and the way that they looked at me, like they felt seen, right? And I didn't do it for anything, but it was in those moments where we can be self-aware about what's going on and how we don't want people's humanity to be stripped away, right? Because I know how many times I was in the workplace or at a thing and I wish somebody would have said something for me, right? Because that's somebody's child, brother, daughter, parent, sister, right? This isn't about race or identity, it's about humanity. And so once we realize that allyship is rooted in humanity, you show up a little bit different. I don't have to agree with every single person I meet on the street, but we all deserve humanity and respect. And so when you are in those spaces, what does it look like so someone can benefit from that? And I hope that he learned a lesson that day too, right? But if I hadn't dialed into that, think about how that person would have left the conversation. And we all know how that feels when you leave the meeting or you leave the thing and somebody said the thing and everybody pretends that nobody did, that feeling. And I never in my space want someone to walk away with that feeling.
And just, you don't have to, but no.
I said what I said, you don't have to holler.
That, so there are so many people that what would you like people to take away from what can you us take a look at
one of the things, Brandi, that I realized was during my career, one of the things that many people are worried about sometimes, especially as Black women, is not being their angry Black woman. Like you don't want to, or if you're Black or brown in the workplace, you're like walking on eggshells all the time so you don't do the thing or say the wrong thing. And I realized that I was never the angry Black woman ever at work. But perhaps when I went home, I might not have been the most nicest, or I might have been snippy or whatever, because we're in these environments all day. And then you go home with all that stress, right? And I realized that, again, healing isn't just for me. it's also for the people that love us the most, because we want them to get the best version of us, and we want to get the best version of ourselves. So when I think about healing, I think about I have to do it because of the people in my life too, because they need the best version that I have to offer, right? And then myself, my future self is waiting on me to heal so that I can enjoy the best that life has to offer. And lastly, for me, a really big journey to my healing was therapy, because I was always working in spaces where I was the only one. So I never had this safe space to be able to let my guard down, let my hair down, talk about the things that I might not have understood, or and even that was a journey, because therapy is more recently, we talk about it a little more openly, but back when I started, in 2008, I started going to therapy for something else, and then realized I needed for other things, but I realized that it's part of my maintenance, right? Just like, and maybe you've been to therapy and you didn't have a good therapist or whatever, but if I tell you to go try a new restaurant in Chicago and you don't have a good experience, would you then tell me that you'll never eat out again? You would maybe find a restaurant that's more suitable to your palate. And so find those spaces, whether it's church, meditation, yoga, whatever it is that allows you the space to be free. We're bringing it back to freedom, right? Work takes so much of our time. We spend so much of our time there. So we deserve a space that's just for us. And once I was able to name some things, it released some freedom in me, because again, I never wanted to call things a thing, and I normalized the behavior and made excuses for things. And once I was able to do that, it took the blinders off, and I was able to have a healthier life holistically. And so the one thing is just know that you deserve healing. There's a book back in the 60s by Toni Cade Bambara called Salt Eaters. And it's a fiction book, but two characters are talking to each other. And one character says, "Sweetheart, do you really want to be well?" And I often think about that line, and I ask myself that every day. Do I really want to be well? And what are those steps that I'm going to have to take in order to have complete wellness? And so I would ask yourself, what are those steps that you have to take for a healthy living, healthy outcome? Because you would never want someone that you love the most to have to endure some of those things. You'd want ultimate freedom for them. So why wouldn't you want that for yourself?
Like on Friday, self-care weekend, take care of yourself. Yeah, there comes a point when I myself.
Are you an Aries? Okay.
Pisces. So I love hard. And it's just like, if I don't take care of myself, how am I going to take care of others? That shouldn't be the inspiration to take care of myself, but it just, puts it on the forefront. Taking care of it. No, you are an introvert, she said.
I am.
But you are like giving us some serious outvert, not introvert with these books. Extrovert, exactly, extrovert. But what I was gonna ask, because I thought I saw a little hinting there be more to come, because I thought I saw something that may
Yes. So The Memo was my first book. Right Within was my second. I wrote a young adult book called You Are More Than Magic, because I realized that our young adults need this messaging before they even get to the workplace. And so, I thought that was the last. I'm like, I've done the books, and so I'm now signed a book deal for my fourth book. And thank you. And I'm excited about that book because, again, when we talk about healing and freedom, sometimes people, even ourselves, will put us in boxes of what they think you can do. And so I've written 3 best-selling books, but I've actually decided that my fourth book will be a pure business book, because if white men and women can write books for everyone, why can't I? And so my fourth book is going to expand the table, and the book title is, this is the first time I'm going to say it out loud here. It's called Talk to Me Nice. So, yeah.
Breaking news. I love that. I love that. And thank you so much, Minda. It has been amazing. So I am going to hit you with some rapid fire.
Let's do it.
End of my phone call. So let's see. Last movie you saw in a theater.
Oh, Little Mermaid.
I love it. Hopefully everyone has seen it as well. Out, see it. And let's see, the last book you read.
Um, God, I read like, I'm not a person that reads like 5 books at a time. I don't know if anybody does that, so I have to pick out one of them. Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. Um, well, I'm always every day. It's Drake and Beyonce, heavy rotation. But I would say I've been in a real big, as I'm writing my next book, real heavy on Afro beats. Like it's been just giving me life as I'm writing. So it's a heavy whiz kid and playlist that I have going on right now. Go ahead, Buster. Chad has not come back and said he was sorry, but I did not expect him to. But I appreciate that. You know, the memo was a lot lighter of a book. If you haven't read any of my books, I'd say start with the memo. But right within is a deeper dive. Because healing is messy, healing is hard, but healing is freeing, and it was very cathartic. Like I was writing right within, and you were more than magic at the same time. So going into being like trying to be like big sister writing this young adult book and then grieving these things that I had even forgotten had happened to me was really hard. There were moments where I'd be like laughing and then having a moment like closing the computer. You know, I don't know if you've seen that meme where that monkey just pushes the computer off the that's kind of how I felt that a lot of it, because I'm like, man, I did I think I love myself, right? But the things that I allowed to happen to me through all of these years, and when I realized that I was in a pattern of abuse, and I didn't recognize some of that, and that was very like startling to me, and I had to unpack some things because you don't realize um, when you're in it into walking away and how freeing it was, and thankful that I was able to leave some of those environments and be able to share the story so that others can also either A, show up for themselves in the way they need to in their current workplace, but then B, leave if they need to. And so reminding ourselves that we always have an option. And lastly, no, but I do have a lot of my colleagues that I did work with who will come back and say, oh, you were talking about so and so, weren't you? I'm like, I was talking about you too. Because but right within, I write about one of my managers, and every like few months he'll try to LinkedIn friend request me, and I'll be like, but until I see in the message, I'm sorry, you're a hindrance to me. You're a trigger, right? And I think that I've come to the point where other people acknowledge it or not, I know for me, right? And I think that's part of it. Some people in the workplace, even after you've had a good conversation, they will never take accountability. But I realize that I no longer need your validation for knowing what I've experienced. And that's also the freeing part. And that's why Right Within is so important, because many of our colleagues are never going to admit that what they're doing is harmful. That's just the reality of it. But we know, and our voices matter. Yeah, Chad. You know, two versions of me maybe would show up for Chad, but the one that still needed to pay my bills, that version of me, I would have given myself permission to and I write about this a little bit in the memo, but I wouldn't have had a conversation based off of feeling. So I think sometimes when we have conversations, then people don't take what we're saying as face value. So if I would have said, Chad, I feel like you're being racist every time I come into the office, he couldn't have really understood that. But I wish that this version of me would have said, you know, Chad, can we have a conversation? I noticed that, and I would start to document these things. So now I'm rooting them in fact, right? And once you provide facts to people, they can't run away from the facts, right? So I would say, you know, Chad, when I was in the meeting with you last week, you said that you people love bright colors. I realized you might not have meant harm, but then the following week you sent me an email and you put a meme of a Black person. And again, I realized that maybe you might not have intended harm, but it was harmful to me. And because I know that you want me to be able to do my best work and you don't want to harm me, I wanted to make you aware of that because this is causing an issue. And I would hate to have to go to HR. I'm sure you'd hate for me to have to do that too, right? Right, okay. But something along the lines, but I rooted in fact, because people will play with you all day if they don't feel like they, and I was very accommodating in the workplace. So people felt like they could just say anything and do anything. And I allowed that, right? And what I've learned is I say what I mean without saying it mean. Because people will make the biggest deal if the coffee filters are not in. Why can't I say something that's compromising my mental health in the workplace? Right. And so again, and if we're normalizing these conversations, then they're no longer just courageous conversations, it's conflict resolution. Right. And I think that a lot of it is a lot of people don't have the tools to be able to communicate effectively. And that's why people shy away from things. So, you know, we need to use our words in the facts so that people can't run away. Because if you ever did have to go to HR, you ever had to, God forbid, legal, people will never say, well, Minda never said anything. She always came smiling. She never said anything for 10 years, you know, and they could say that, right? But if I'm actually having a conversation, then there's some paper, there's some facts, paper trail. You know, I think that's part of where our authentic voices and our healing, what makes sense for you, right? And we're all going to do it a little bit differently. But now I've realized that my mental health, my voice supersedes anybody else's, right? So rather you get it or not, rather you acknowledge it or not as the offender, you've now been alerted that it is harmful to me, right? Rather it's well-intentioned or unintentional, it doesn't matter if it's harmful to me, right? So what I've learned is I used to try to coddle my feelings and the other person's feelings. Now I no longer center their feelings because I'm rooting the situation in fact, and then they can take that and do whatever they want. Right? And I no longer hold space to be petting you on the back and trying to heal myself at the same time. And that's why I rooted in I say what I mean without saying it mean. I presented you with these facts, and now I'm not going to spend the rest of my day wondering what you thought about what I said, how you took it, and all, because that's hindering my healing. And so I'm giving you enough grace that I came to you and had a conversation, and then you can do what you want with it after that. But I think that's the other part that hurts us in the healing process, is because for so long we have been oppressed in the workplace. So now we're afraid of what you might think of what we just told you when I was the one that was harmed, you know? So it's like this Stockholm syndrome that we're like battling inside the workplace in many times. So I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily empathizing with that person, but I'm creating boundaries. And what this all really boils down to is boundary setting, because once I establish what the boundary is, I guarantee that person is not going to keep coming back to that line. Right? And if they do, then that's another conversation that we need to have. But I gave you this boundary, right? But I do think, just like anything, if I'm causing someone else harm, I hope they would give me the benefit of the doubt to have a conversation with me so that I could try to course correct, right? And I think, again, as adults, I teach at NYU, and I tell my graduate students, all this is conflict resolution. You don't want to have a conversation because you haven't yet built the tools in your toolkit, and the other person may not have the tools to do it all as well. But when you present it in a certain fashion, but don't shy away from those conversations, because that just creates more space for misinterpretation, right? And more harm being caused. And I think it's really important. If you're looking for a conflict resolution book, Difficult Conversations by Douglas Stone is a really, really great read. I'm an Aries. I'm an April Aries, to be clear. Okay. Right. I think that's a great question. I think part of it is where imposter syndrome, sometimes we get somebody sees something in us, right? And they invite us to the room in many cases, and we'll question if we have what it takes to be there. Obviously, you do, because somebody brought you into that space, right? Or they believe that you could pick it up along the way, right? And so I think we have to anchor into that we belong, that sense of belonging. But because we've been questioning ourselves in so many ways, that we haven't been affirmed in the ways that we need to. And so when you're entering to that space, learn to own it and settle into it, and think about, the seat is for me, but it's also creating space for somebody else, because now I get to speak someone else's name in the room that's not here. So I root myself in that. But the other part of it is, we should always be upskilling, right? So what are those things? When I was in my former life, because I was very much an introvert and I never saw myself being a public speaker later down the line, but early in my career, I used to stutter, and I was very afraid. I'd be the person, I had all these great ideas, but I'd be sitting in the back of the room, which is nothing wrong with sitting in the back of the room, but I was fearful to use my voice in the front. And so one of the things, I looked around the room, I'm like, who are in the positions that I want to be in? What are the skill sets that I need? So when I do, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. What are the skills that I need so that when I do get into that space, I feel comfortable, right? So that I'm not questioning myself. And I looked around the room, and a lot of the things that people had, they were using their voice. How am I going to get to the top or my next rung on the ladder if I'm not using my voice? And so I started to take public speaking classes, speech classes, improv classes. Like, I invested heavy in that because I wanted to be able to feel confident, right? And once you're confident in what you're doing, then you have the courage, right? The ability to do something that frightens one. And I think we have to, it's always good to have a little bit of that anxiousness to want more out of your career, and just thinking about, what are the tools that just make me even more of an asset, right? And so I think even when you're in those rooms, you can continue to upskill yourself. You think about, a lot of people right now are fearful of like AI, right? These are opportunities for us to tap in and see, what can we add to the conversation? I should, just like Siri, maybe some of us were afraid of her at first. Now we use her all the time. So, thinking about those things, like putting ourselves in those positions that do scare us. Even to this day, I continue to level up in different ways. My next, being an author, that's not the only place I want to go. I've been taking screenwriting classes at UCLA for the last 3 years because I started a production company. I want to take books to the big screen, to documentaries, right? Right now, maybe I would have a little, quote unquote, question myself, but I'm preparing myself, right? And that's okay to have that, but knowing that I still belong in those spaces, right? So always telling yourself, again, I belong in every space that I enter, but also realizing that not every space is going to allow me to grow. And that's the piece that I hope you'll hold on to. Yeah, thank you for that question. I would say the cool thing about You Are More Than Magic, my young adult book, is in the physical form, there's like workbooks in there too to be in. I wrote it in a way that if you are a parent or someone in their life, a mentor, that you can read it together and ask each other's questions as you go through it and kind of open up that dialogue. But it's also on Audible too. So for those who don't want to read, all my books are, if you're not tired of my voice, all my books are on Audible. But the other thing I would say that was really important tool that's inside that book is networking, right? Even understanding the network that they're creating, even in high school and college, is very important because you never know who might be your first investor, who might be your next manager. And so building that. And also, I think for many of us, I say it was a tool for young adults, but also for adults as well, is the people that we choose to befriend and friend. Like networking is very important, and having a squad of people that you can be supportive of and that can be supportive of you, and just understanding again that our success is not a solo sport, and choosing wisely, right? When I was younger, I used to feel like, oh, I had all of these friends, and my grandmother would say, Minda, when you get to be my age, you'll be happy if you can count your good friends on one hand, right? And I didn't realize that then, because I thought quantity over quality. And so I think too, as we're moving and navigating the world, having good people that you can trust, right? My next book is about trust in the workplace, and it's really important that we start to build that trust so that we don't allow them to lose what's so beautiful about them right now, and letting this world kind of chip away at those beautiful pieces that they have right now. You know, I do a lot of consulting at companies, and I'll hear some of the seasoned employees say those millennials, those Gen Z, they don't want to do their time and this, that, and the other. And I always say, don't you wish you had your voice in that way when you were their age? Maybe you wouldn't have waited 20 years to ask for the promotion, but it's how we finesse it, right? So teaching them how to finesse it and how to navigate it, and pouring into them in a way where, yeah, we didn't have certain conversations because culturally we might not have had the tools, right? But now we should be able to have other conversations. And so even You Are More Than Magic, I have a lot of adults that read that book because their 18-year-old self, their 21-year-old self needed some of those tools. And I just think allowing them the space to be their healthiest and authentic self, and nurturing in that, but mostly their voice, because I feel like sometimes we're trying to stifle it, right? When we can better understand it a little bit more. So thank you.
So much, very personal. That is been through and strong enough to share that with us. With us today, can't thank you enough for writing this book because need it. It's congratulations on and can you share with everyone how they can get this book and your other book and the one that's coming?
The one that's coming, it'll be a little while. I got to finish writing it, but send me some good energy and prayers. But thank you, Brandi, for being in conversation. Thank you all again. Thank you, Mr. Brown, for everyone. But you can go to mindaharts.com, or you can buy any of the books wherever you like to buy your books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Black-owned bookstore, woman-owned bookstore, wherever you like to buy them. But thank you so much for having me.
And if you don't want to read, there are. Thank you.
Thank you.